Welcome to the NFP Podcast, where we explore the empowering world of natural family planning. I'm Amy Smith. Join me and my co-host Emily Appledorn each week. Together, we're here to dive deep into the science, the stories, and the spirituality behind NFP. Every week, we push back against the free love culture and advocate for a culture of responsible love, where intentionality and respect are at the forefront of family planning. Join us as we discuss everything from the practicalities of charting and fertility awareness to the profound impact NFP can have on relationships and communities. Whether you're new to NFP or a seasoned pro, our podcast is your go-to resource for honest conversations, expert insights, and real-life experiences. So grab a friend, settle in, and get ready to be inspired. This is the NFP Podcast.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody.
Hi.
Today, I want to start out this episode kind of sharing a story, and then that's going to lead to the topic of our conversation. So I want to frame it first. And I want to preface even the story just by saying, I have been since high school, genuinely, maybe even before that, just intellectually very curious about human sexuality, our sexual desires, the manifestations of it, the conversation around nature versus nurture, and then looking historically and religiously across cultures, across religions, across generations, how we as humans interpret this desire that we have for sexual intimacy, for love, human connection. And is there a right order for it? Out of all these different ways it can manifest, right? All these desires we have, and then all the options we have for living out, is there a right one, if you will, and even if we don't say right and wrong, what are the different outcomes that come from pursuing these different ways these different avenues we can with this desire? I always kind of come back to food, but I have a desire for something, for food, for consumption. Well, if I channel that desire for something salty and I have a steak and a potato, or I have a bag of potato chips or a big bowl of trail mix, is there a difference in the outcomes mentally, physically, kind of emotionally, what I'm getting from those experiences? And then and then we have kind of a conversation about that. And I feel like that those questions and that prompting of conversation and debate seems very socially acceptable in a lot of areas of life, health and fitness. That's one of my big other side interests, or nutrition. But when it comes to human sexuality, and I found this when I was starting my PhD program, you're not allowed to ask certain questions. You're not allowed to be intellectually curious. It's well, no, here's kind of a consensus statement we've come to, and that's it. And if you think differently, you are hateful, you are a bigot, there's something wrong with you. You can't be intellectually curious. You can't ask questions. Am I making sense, Emily?
Yeah, I was going to say that makes total sense to me, and I've never thought about it in that way. But when you lay it out like that, that's exactly how it is. Yeah.
Right. You just can't even ponder it. It's almost like you're labeled. They've done a very great job, whoever they is, quote unquote.
Right.
Right. It's been very well presented that should you think these things, well, you need to stop thinking these things, because that means, you're just a bad person and you're mean. Okay. So I say that because I was at my kids' sports activity 3 weeks ago now, probably about that, maybe a month ago. And it's not something I have to be involved in. So I go and I sit for an hour while my twins do this activity, and then we leave. And I sit kind of in the parent waiting area with all the other parents. And, of course, I'm an hour without having to be on top of my kids. So I am hardcore multitasking. I'm watching them, I'm listening to a podcast, and I'm trying to finish knitting my blanket that I made for my grandmother.
That's amazing.
So right. I'm an hour. And I know all parents probably are yes, I have an hour to just kind of do my thing.
Right.
So anyway, I'm trying to do all this stuff. And also, a little bit of people watching in there, right? Because we all do that. So in walks this woman, and she's carrying a baby, like a car seat, and sits down in front of me and starts talking to this other, kind of, I think they're grandparents. They bring their granddaughter to class, and they're in the same class as my sons. And this woman comes in with the baby, the car seat, and her daughter is in the same class as my son as well. But I guess not consistently. They were just there for like a makeup or something. Anyway, she comes in, sits down, starts chatting. They're chatting, and I'm knitting, listening to my podcast, watching the kids, doing all the things. And I hear, and she takes the baby out of the car seat, and the baby doesn't look anything like her. I'm just like, oh, but I was like, what a cute baby. But it didn't occur to me really that the baby didn't really look anything like this woman until the people she was talking to, one of the women there, who I'm pretty sure had somewhat of an intellectual disability, just by the way she spoke and how and the content she was saying, it wasn't necessarily socially just like normal, like typical what we would say. And I worked with kids with special needs, so I feel like I'm pretty good at picking this up. So anyway, they're chatting, and then she makes a comment. This woman makes a comment to the woman holding the baby. Hopefully everyone can follow this because I feel like it can be very confusing.
It makes sense.
Okay. She says to her, oh, he looks just like you. And the woman looks, is looking at her and kind of smiles, isn't mean or anything. And she said, oh, thanks. But she, she's kind of like, you could tell like that's not true. Like the baby doesn't look anything like her at all. So their conversation continues. And one of the women asks this woman holding the baby, how is so-and-so something? I wasn't listening to the whole conversation, right? My ears perked up when I heard this comment, and I looked at the baby. I'm like, the baby doesn't look anything like her, actually. But, sometimes you don't look like your kid. Sometimes that just totally happens. I know lots of couples that happens. Okay. So anyway, the mom responds to this woman's question, whatever it was, and she says, well, my wife is a physical therapist. And I like immediately perk up, and I'm like, wife? And I'm like, oh, but you're a woman. And I'm thinking, oh, you're like in a same-sex relationship, and you guys have these two children, which we know, which just like, okay. So just that alone, right, Emily? Like initially we're like, that's actually not possible, right? Because two eggs, as we've talked about on this podcast before, how babies come into existence, how human life begins, there has to be a sperm and an egg.
Right.
We have yet to find out a way to make it so two sperms and two eggs make people. So, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking like, this is not possible. So how did this do this? And, my genuine nerdiness, intellectual curiosity, I'm not even like morally assessing the situation. Right. I'm just like reeling right now, again, listening to the podcast, knitting, watching the kids. Now I'm like reeling on this, like, how is this possible? What are they doing? Anyway, the baby is doesn't look, this woman is blonde, blue eyes, and this baby is very dark. And, the girl, the other child is out, doing this activity with my kids, and that child looks just like the woman sitting in front of me. So anyway, they're talking, and over the course of their conversation, I'm not listening to the whole thing, right? Because I'm perseverating on this, like, whoa, how is this happening? The next part I hear, though, is her talking about pregnancy, because they ask, like everyone asks, like, how's the baby sleeping? That's always your first question, right? Especially if you are a parent. Yeah, if you're a parent and you have someone, you see someone with like a small baby, how's it going? How are you sleeping?
Yeah.
So they're asking how's it going, sleep, and somehow like the pregnancy comes up. Well, what I gather from what I heard her say is that this other woman who she calls her wife, was pregnant with the baby she's holding. So she carried this baby, and the woman who was at the gymnastics place, right? This woman carried the girl out on the floor with my boys doing gymnastics. So they each took turns, if you will, carrying a baby, but those sperm had come from somewhere else. And that obviously did not come up in the casual conversation at the activity. So, which is very appropriate to not have that conversation. Right. So anyway, it was just like a basic, like, I had this baby, she had this baby. And because I guess this woman that she's in this relationship with did not have a very good pregnancy, because they asked like, oh, are you going to have more children? I think that's what the question was. And she responded with, well, I had a good pregnancy, but hers was harder. So if we did it, like I would, probably be pregnant again. Anyway, Emily, so chime in if you have any thoughts, okay? But my mind is just like reeling here, and I want to ask all these questions, which I know to be totally inappropriate. And of course, I did not ask, but I'm like, so how did you do this? Again, not for any moral reason, just my own curiosity. Like,
Right.
so did you guys go like an IUI route? Did you like just go sleep with a man and get pregnant? Like, what did you do? I'm just like very curious. Okay. So that was 1 week. Then the next week we go back for the activity and the other woman is there. And the other woman looks exactly like the baby. Like I'm just like, okay, yes, this makes so much sense. One of them looks like one baby. One of them looks like one child. One of them looks like the other child. And so, still knitting, podcast, doing all the things. And I'm just thinking more, like I can't hear what they're talking about because I'm farther away now, but I just see and I'm like, oh, okay, this is the person she was talking about. And yeah, so that's kind of where I want our conversation to pick up, Emily. It's like, I think sometimes right now, for some reason, again, this topic is very contentious. And I would love to just kind of intellectually stew here and say a lot of the things that I was thinking. And I'd love to hear, any of your thoughts. But the reason I was so interested in this and wanted to bring this up is because I have yet had this. I have I've seen people and I've heard so much about same-sex couples who are trying to have children together now, trying to form quote unquote families together by having children or adopting children. And so it hasn't entered my world yet. So this was kind of the first experience of like, oh, this child who they are trying to raise together is in one of the classes with my kids. And the girl's adorable. I mean, everyone's so nice. This is nothing about their character, right, Emily? Nothing about character. It's just, I was baffled by so many things. So the first thing I want to start with, which is a little bit, to me, kind of quote unquote scary, because I think it is a softening of the human conscience, is that now when we see two women, I'm not going to, or I guess two men, but I'm not talking about two men in this situation. This specific situation was two women. We see two women, quote unquote, married with children. And from what I could gather, right, in the whole place, no one else seemed really uncomfortable with this. And I'm grateful that there was that. I'm grateful, and I'm also concerned that my conscience was still like flags going up. Like, that's not normal. That's not okay. There's something off with this situation. It's not okay. But it wasn't as raw as I think it would have been, maybe even 15, 20 years ago when I was younger. Do you know what I mean, Emily?
Yeah.
Like there has been, because our culture has moved because of law, right? Even our laws now say that this is marriage. There has been a watering down of a softening of the conscience. And that is something I find to be like a big red flag. Like, oh my gosh, that people just assume this to be okay, that all the adults in the room are going along with this idea that these children can be raised in a family with two women, and that we all have to say that everyone's just like, that's just the same as a mom and a dad raising their children. There's no difference here. Everything is great here. Like, I just find that very idea of like the conscience not being rubbed,
right,
as like we're just too comfortable with something we should be uncomfortable with.
Like our moral compass is just shifted. And like you said, is that due to time? Is that due to your age? Maybe when you were younger, maybe it was still foreign, or was that just because so many things have happened over the last couple of decades even? Yeah, these are all ideas and thoughts that I have, but as it sounds like you as well, I'm not in situations where I am placed to think about these things on a regular, frequent basis, as far as just in my environment. And that's not on purpose per se. It's just our daily life. And so when you talk about it in this capacity, it's like, yeah, it makes me wonder how I would react, or not necessarily respond, but just react. And it feels just, I immediately think of the kids, right? Like I feel very deeply and sad for the kids. And I think the sadness comes from a few things, like a lack of knowledge of truth, perhaps, that they might grow up with or might not grow up with. And then just the lack of a father to be in their lives and present and to show them that masculinity. And so, yeah, I think my initial thought is just the kids.
So that was another aspect of this. So my first kind of reflection on the situation was, oh, it's interesting, the erosion of the conscience, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That like adults who are to be protectors and guardians of children are not courageous enough anymore to stand up and to say, this is not okay. And obviously, I would never at this sporting event go up to the parents or go up to that small child and say, do you know you're living in a not normal environment and that you actually can't have two moms and you are missing a dad? Never would I ever do. That's horrible.
Of course.
Horrible, Emily, right? Horrible. Never. But as a culture and as a whole, adults are just not having conversations with other adults. We've just let this slip into normal. And how this connects to our podcast, where we talk about natural family planning, is because heterosexual couples have removed the procreative aspect of sexuality and the sexual act, which, from my understanding, this is maybe it's my perception, but I've read lots of social science books that would agree with this, is the implication of obviously this has always existed before birth control was invented, okay? Disordered sexual desires have always existed. But when en masse, as a culture, we have adopted this view that sex and children can be divorced from each other. Well, what is downstream from that? Well, then, who cares if, I clearly can, as a woman, be in a relationship with another woman because the procreative nature of our act doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not an important aspect of it. It doesn't make that act, more valid or not. So I feel like the burden is on heterosexual couples for first saying that we are defining what sex is by saying that we can remove that procreative nature by deliberately kind of sterilizing ourselves or using these artificial methods to say this act can be a sterile act. Well, because then, two women can have a sterile act or two men can have a sterile act. So yeah, my first point was the erosion of the conscience, which got me sad at okay, if we're not seeing this as there are better options. There is a rightly ordered way to live out this desire. And we're not having those conversations anymore. Our conscience is just muted and dead in that regard. That's a big red flag, And the second, well, there was, I think, three points here. The second one, Emily, is what you raised, which is the children. So I started thinking how interesting that we say a single mom raising kids, the absent father. We have so much social science to prove, or that proves, sorry, it's not a randomized controlled trial, so it doesn't prove, that strongly correlates and strongly suggests the absence of a father has ramifications on the development of that child. Just as the absence of a mother, right? Although that's less common, right? It's more an absent father.
Right.
And so we hold that to be true in heterosexual couples when the father leaves or was just never around, right? That this is grossly impacting the development of our children. But we don't seem to have that same visceral for the absentee of a father in the case of two women trying to raise children, where they just go to men to use their sperm and then come back to the same-sex relationship and say, okay, and now we can take over and do it ourselves without the man who was attached to that sperm in this child's life. And that's robbing that child of what they deserve, which is their mother and their father, because it took both of them to bring them into existence.
Right. And I think just from listening to something recently from a same-sex, from a woman that's in a same-sex relationship, married at that, I think that their side of it would be, well, we're in a loving, committed relationship. That's what I've recently heard. And so because that marital contract creates quote unquote, what's the word I'm looking for? Stability, if you will, or in the family, then that is just as important, if not as important as having two heterosexual, a male and a female in a relationship. And I don't think that equates. I don't think that can stand, really. I understand what they're trying to say is that when you have two people that love each other, which is what they're trying to say, two people that love each other, that is the same as a man and a woman loving each other. And for a child, and just for civilization in and of itself, that's not the case. That is a different relationship than two heterosexual people loving each other in a marriage. So I think that's what they would say. I hate to say they even, but
Right.
I think that's what
No, people that try to justify that lifestyle as being a good for children is just, to me, it's a weak adulthood, right? It's not being intellectually honest, right? It's that, what is it? Cognitive dissonance, right? Like, okay, I'm doing something, so I'm going to find a way to justify it.
Yes.
There's a lot of social science to suggest, no, in fact, it's not that kids need two adults that love each other and love them to grow into, really well-balanced humans, or it's not even what they even desire as children. They desire the actual mother and the actual father figure. Like the male and the femaleness make the difference.
Yes.
It's not just two loving parents. Sure, having a male and a female that are fighting and having a toxic marriage, that's going to also negatively impact children. But I think if we talk like hierarchically speaking now, and we will list, Emily and I are not experts on this, okay? So we'll list links to different articles and things that we're talking about. But this is not meant to be an expert conversation. This is a conversation that normal, everyday people can have. And that's, I think Emily and I are pretty normal and everyday people. So it's just like, why aren't we all talking about this too? We don't need the experts to tell us what we've known forever in human existence, right? And just what biology tells us. You need female and you need male to bring new human life into existence. So isn't it so interesting then that we don't think, well, maybe the start of life needing the male and the female, maybe like throughout life, they continue to need the male and the female. We just think like, oh, well, we just need it at the beginning to get the life going. But then after that, well, then anybody can just take care of the person. And it's like, okay, I guess, you could make that argument, but I feel like, but wouldn't you want to ask that question? Like, well, can you? Is it the same? Like, can we just bring sperm and egg together, in a petri dish, insert it into some woman, delivers set child, and then we just give the child to anybody,
right?
Two men, two women, man and woman. Even like we know, like the most ideal situation, right, is biological parents taking care of their biological child. Adoption is wonderful.
Absolutely.
Fostering is wonderful, but it's still not the top echelon. The top is biological parents with biological children.
And it feels like that is a social norm. That is a constant. That is throughout society. That is by default what we all hope to achieve. When somebody gets divorced, it's not an ideal situation. And they know that nobody is, that there's a sadness for so many things that could have been in that marriage when something like that happens. And so if none of this matters, why do things like that matter so much? Why do we, and maybe they don't matter to everyone, but generally as a whole, most people are very upset when a divorce happens, a parent passes away. All of these things have huge just ramifications on society, really, not just the family, but it affects a lot of different things.
And the development of the child, which is the part that you had brought up. So the conscience is one, and then the child, right? Like, what does the child need? So that even that woman, right, defending her same-sex relationship and any children they have brought into that relationship, I think is a way, it's very egocentric. It's very narcissistic. Like, well, this is what I want. This is me building my life, right? Like, I have this desire, and so now I can be in this relationship, and I also want to have children because that's what heterosexual couples do. Like, I want to have the it's so funny. It's so funny. It's terribly ironic, right, Emily? Like,
Yes.
you're still trying to do what the normal is,
Yes.
while at the same time saying the normal doesn't matter, but you're trying to recreate it yourself.
Yes.
So anyway, it is very adult centric and not child centric. And that's selfish, right? That's very adult centered and not child centered to say, like, well, we love each other and we're going to be really good parents to this person. I have no doubt that you have strong feelings for one another. I have no doubt that you, like these two women, right, that had their daughter in the class with my kids, like, I don't know anything about them. I've seen them for 30 minutes twice, like, from those 30 minutes in a public setting, they seem very well behaved, very nice people. Like, children seem very nice, typical 3-year-old little girl, like, nothing seems horribly wrong. But that doesn't mean, I don't know what happens outside of this context, right? And that's not saying that child, right, still doesn't deserve to have the mother and the father that brought them into existence.
Right. It goes back to one reason that we as Catholic Christians are not okay with IVF. It's not okay. The ends don't justify the means, right? So you can't create this life. It's not fair to the life to not give them a mother and a father. And so your desire is not greater than what the child deserves. And so that's hard, right? Because especially if somebody wants a child, there's so many things that go into that. But we really have to think about the child, and make the child equal to us. So they can't be lesser than us. They deserve a mother and a father. That's how they are created. I mean, it's like you said, we have not come up with the way to create human beings from 2 sperm or 2 eggs. So that's how they were created. That's what they deserve.
So the class ended and we were getting ready to leave, and I was getting the kids in the car. So I got one of the twins buckled, and we have a minivan, right? So I got one of the twins buckled, and I closed the door to go around to go to the other side to buckle the other person. And as I'm walking around the car, these 2 women are walking with now the baby back in the car seat, and the other one is they're like both holding the daughter's hand in the middle. And as I turn the corner, so I'm walking behind them for maybe like a split second, but one of the women who's holding the baby in the car seat turns to the right and looks at the young girl who's probably 3. She's got to be 3 to be in this class. And she says to her, "Do you want to go home?" Because they presumably, both of those women came from work, I think. Like, they picked the kids up and they went straight to this class. She said to her, "Do you want to go home with mommy?" And then I turned the corner, right, to put so-and-so in the car seat. And Emily, that's I just got my mind going. Like, mommy or mommy? Like, what do you mean? Like, who do you want to go home with? Mommy? I was so, I really wanted to go back and be like, what are we calling the other person? Like, is it mommy and mommy, And I wanted to cry. I could cry right now for this little girl. How freaking confusing. There she is holding these 2 hands, this little girl, and I just felt so sad. Emily. And I don't mean it to be like dramatic, but it was like, mommy or who? Mommy or mommy? No, we have mommy and we have a daddy. We don't have 2 mommies. Like, that's not possible. And this also ties in my comment about the conscience. So I grew up with some disordered, not okay things in my home, right? And this is maybe some like a personal wound coming out in my feeling of like seeking justice for this young girl. But I know I have very vivid feelings that have caused lots of troubles as I've matured into adulthood. When you are growing up in something that is not normal, not healthy, not okay, and no adult has the courage to say, this is not okay, you grow up with this feeling inside of you that this is not okay. Is something off? The conscience, something. But no one is affirming it. Nobody is saying the quiet part out loud. No one is calling out the elephant in the room. You're just continually growing up, and then you're doubting yourself, right? Then it's like, well, I guess I must be wrong here, because surely if something was wrong, someone would say something is wrong, okay? So here's my little conscience, right? The little heart, and not just mine, because I'm not unique, Emily, right? Like I felt for this little girl who I imagine is growing up in a world where while this is somewhat socially acceptable, it's still not the norm. Most of the kids in her daycare class and her school that she'll go to, wherever she is about, they have a mother and a father, and so this is not the typical. And so how confusing for this young child who might already internally, left to her own devices without societal influence, be saying something's off here, and then to not have it affirmed by other people. To me, that was just like the sense of injustice. I just wanted to which of course I didn't, obviously, but I just wanted to go hug her and be like, you can go home with mommy or daddy. That should have been the statement, but that's not what she heard. So yeah, I just feel like that little girl, that confusion, and because there is this nature of confusion, what have the adults now in our culture done? Now we've brought all these books, right? We brought it into literature, into schools, into libraries, trying to reestablish norm so these kids don't feel that angst, that natural angst of their conscience telling them something is missing in my life. We tried to speak loudly over it to say, no, this is totally normal, right? We have all the books in the library. 2 mommies, 2 daddies. This is just the same as a mommy and daddy. Meanwhile, these little kids' consciences are rotting inside of them because they know something is off. They feel like something is off, but they're being told that that's not true. Everything's fine. And that's just a horrible place to live. And it causes self-doubt. It causes ramifications in later relationships and confidence in oneself and understanding right from wrong. And I just think that it's like a clarion call to the adults. Like, you guys, we have to speak up to say this is not okay for the sake of these children, And anyway, we'll share some links to some articles about this through the perspective of adult children who grew up in these relationships, because we now have, decades of this kind of being normal, quote unquote, or being like something that has been happening in children who've been growing up in these environments. So it's interesting to hear their side of it and their stories. So I will share those links as well. But so yeah, that was kind of the second part. So the conscience, the child, and then kind of the mingling of the two. And then there was a third point I wanted to bring up too, Emily, but any thoughts on that?
No, I just resonate with the idea of the conscience and how we are born with such even as little kids, we do know what's right and wrong. Even as a little kid, you're looking for the parent to set that boundary. Like, can I get away with this? I don't know. And it's a point of safety, right? Like, when somebody confirms what you're feeling, it helps you feel safe. And so I can definitely resonate with the disorder as a child within the home. And when your conscience is not confirmed, there are so many things that result from that. And so this brings up, obviously, we're not saying that you can't have issues, if you will, from growing up in a married heterosexual home that, on paper creates stability, right? But there's other things going on that just cause a lot of chaos. And so there are, studies to show all of that too. So it does beg the question, it should be okay. Why is it not okay to have these conversations about same-sex couples? Because it does come across, or society has built it up to be just completely unacceptable. Even the studies that you're referring to, they want to get picked apart by other researchers. And it's like, it's okay. It's okay to pick that research apart because we want to go with the flow, if you will.
Well, and I would rather have that where we can just keep having the conversation, because I mean, again, one of my other areas is like health, fitness, etc. And there's so much debate in that area. There's so many people with different views, so much conversation about it. I would much rather just have that. And I feel like now there's just not even a healthy debate or conversation. And perhaps Christians are not good at this either. I think, just as a whole, I don't feel like the majority of Christians don't feel comfortable with the conversation around sexuality. They're not even feeling very well equipped or knowledgeable about, God's design and how do we actually handle this situation. And I'll share, because this was my real experience, and it kind of ties into the third point about this that I wanted to bring up, Emily. So when I was had a reversion kind of back to the faith, I would go to daily mass before I would go to work at this church kind of near me. It was the closest one to where I lived, and it had an early morning mass. I think mass was at 6:45 a.m. So I could go and then get to school on time. Okay, so I would go to mass, and over the time of going to mass, I started to meet other people that would go to daily mass, and I met one of my now best friends. We still write each other, like old-fashioned handwriting, write each other. She's older than me, much older than me, and I kind of assumed when I met her that she probably had same-sex attraction, but like it never came up in conversation, obviously, for a while. And then one day, I think we had gone to it was almost like a day of reflection or something at the parish. And we were both walking out, or maybe it was just like a daily mass. I don't really remember. But I very vividly remember us walking away from the church to the parking lot, and she was walking with me. And she looked so nervous, Emily. Like we had really formed a good friendship. She just looked so nervous and kind of like almost like a little shaky, like if I had touched her hands, about her palms were sweating. And she told me that she had same-sex attraction and that she had been, very active. She didn't go into her whole story, but she had been in active lesbian relationships for a long time. And that there was a wonderful Franciscan priest, and she had found her way back to church and to confession. And he, was so loving. He knew he really knew the church's teaching and was able to counsel her well. And long story short, she was also involved in drugs and alcohol. And so she's been sober for a really long time. And she says she's also been free of being in those relationships, but she still has same-sex attraction. And, she's not quote unquote cured, as if it's like a disease you have to be cured of, right? She still has this desire, but she has this profound relationship with God where she feels totally loved in who she is, and she feels great love for God, and she lives chastely with these desires. And she's so freaking holy, Emily. She is so going to be a saint, immediately when she dies. This woman is just so amazing. I love her so, so much, so much. And she even participated in our wedding. She did one of the readings for us. She's just a wonderful person. But I will tell you, when she first shared that with me, I think inside I was kind of like, whoa, wait, I did not know. I did not know anything. And so my immediate reaction was wait a second, I know that this is wrong. And by this, what I meant was the acts, the homosexual relationship, homosexual act, that is intrinsically evil. But having the desire, I didn't know what to do about this. Here's this woman sharing this with me, and she's saying she's not in these relationships, or she has this desire. And I'm like, I did not know, Emily. The Lord used that conversation to blow open my world. And I'm so grateful to God that I didn't run away in fear, but instead he brought in teaching on same-sex attraction. He showed me the teaching in the catechism on sexual desire, on chastity. He showed me more of theology of the body and Christopher West and so much of his work on addressing same-sex attraction. And I almost like I ran back to my friend, weeks later after I was devouring all of this truth, feeling so much joy. And I just remember embracing her and feeling this deep connection with her in our brokenness and in the restoration, because I had gone through my own healing journey, right? Even with a heterosexual desire, just as broken, like just having the same, it was basically, we had the same past, but she had it with girls and I had it with guys. And it was just this like union of friendship and camaraderie. And I just was praising God, Emily. I was like, God, you are so good. Like, you are so good. And anyway, I was just like, this is amazing. And the truth is amazing and salvific and just amazing. So I say that because this is the third point, Emily. So looking at these two women together with these children, I think one of the things that this nature of quote unquote same-sex marriage relationship, trying to have children, it's actually a disservice to these individuals with same-sex attraction, because we are saying to them, you cannot live to be your full true self unless you copy what heterosexual couples do. Unless you quote unquote get married and quote unquote have children, then you will not feel fulfilled and your desires will not be fulfilled. And that is a huge lie. It's a huge lie. So there's so many tears to this one experience I had watching these two women, Emily. But this to me was actually even more so than the conscience, the erosion of the conscience, the impact on children. It's actually the disservice to those two women to say, like, what did God make you for? And why are you copying someone else's plan? So you have this desire. I'm sorry. Who cares? Go about your life. Do amazing things. What are the gifts God's given you? For some people, and I've met people now and I've heard so many stories, right? People with same-sex attraction. Some of them, it's like a wound, a healing, that needs to happen. And then they get married and they're in heterosexual relationships and they go on to have children. And it's kind of like, okay, that was like a thing of the past, right? But then we do believe that there are people like my good friend in Florida who has she would explain it as like a deep-seated same-sex desire, right? And to her, it's, well, I take up my cross and I follow the Lord. I'm still called to chastity, just as everybody else is called to chastity, right? My sexual sin does not get to be approved just because it's of a homosexual nature and people feel bad for me. Well, we don't approve of heterosexual disordered desires and inclinations either, right, Emily? Like, pornography is wrong. Promiscuity, sleeping with people outside of marriage is wrong. Like, it doesn't matter who you're doing it with. It's wrong in nature. So I feel like that's the third part of this. And I think this is an area that is also not talked about a lot. It's like the disservice to these two women to say, in order to be fulfilled, you have to do it like everybody else. And then I'll stop talking, Emily. But that is one thing I just love about the Catholic faith. And I love about the richness of the saints is like, no, the path to holiness is unique. It's what God has created for you to do and for you to be in this world. And you don't have to do it like everybody else or be like everybody else. And you can have a full, fulfilled life by being a single person, like by contributing to your community, again, the lack of conversation, the lack of creativity around this. Like, what are things that you can do with who you are? Okay, so you have same-sex attraction. You feel like it's very deep-seated that you could not possibly be married and have children, that would just be the severe violation of who you are, and if you did, you would have to be married to someone of the same sex, quote unquote, and have children with them, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well then single chastity is your call. But some people find lots of healing. And I know too, I don't know if you read this article. Sorry, Emily, I'm totally monopolizing.
No, please.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. This other article I remember reading from, anecdotal, right? But someone's experience with same-sex attraction is like they're married and in a heterosexual marriage with children. They're married in the church. and they have this desire sometimes. And his argument about it was like, well, what's the difference really between me having this desire for perhaps other men sometimes versus, your spouse who has it for like other women? Like, you still have, do you know what I mean? I'm like, it was just a really good point, and kind of like, why are we inflating this so much? You know
Right.
what I mean?
It goes back to chastity just as a whole, right? Someone might be in a marriage that has a desire for their neighbor. I mean, and that could be a heterosexual desire. That doesn't make it okay. That's still disordered. So, yeah, yeah, just because a woman might be dealing with that, or a man, but they're married, it's still, we're called to live chastity. And so, yeah, I think that, those might be desires that need to be um, addressed, if you will, wounds that need to be worked through, whatever they're.
Right, like the explored, right?
Yes,
Like, what is the
explored.
nature of this desire? Right,
Exactly, exactly.
right.
And so then there might be some healing there that needs to happen. But in general, just generally speaking, this is just the same. A desire, it can be heterosexual or homosexual, and it can be disordered.
And I feel like there's even more of a need because we have because the nature of our culture is we're exposed to so much, so many lifestyles, quote unquote, so much information, so many people that we really have no connection with on a day-to-day basis. But because we have so much internet access and so much media and social, quote unquote, media, that I feel like, what if we just did like a detox and kind of like reset, right? Like reset our personal settings back to like the manufacturer settings. What is our like manufacturer setting? Okay. Is it really this disordered nature, or has nature influenced the formation of this desire? Because that was something I know personally for me too, Emily. Like, it's amazing how a lot of my desires changed when I started consuming different media, listening to different, including like listening to different music, watching different shows. When I changed my friend network, when I changed the community I was around, when I read different material, when my behaviors changed, my community changed, and what my inputs were, all of a sudden, like a lot of my desires also changed. You know what I mean? So there is this conversation like nature versus nurture, because sometimes all of those things can change and the desire still doesn't change. So then it's kind of like, okay, now what do we do here? And that's where I bring up my really good friend who, did all the things and still had the desire, and the church still has an answer for that.
Yeah.
You are still a beloved child of God, made in his image and likeness. Let's take up our cross like everybody else and follow after him. And she does wonderful things for the church and for the community. And she's a full, rich life with lots of family and friends. And she's never going to be married. And that's okay, people, because you can still have a full, rich life if that's what you're called to, is single life. Like, it's possible, you don't have to replicate what someone else is doing in order to be happy. It's almost like I almost wonder, like, again, this couple, these two women at the activity. What it got me thinking was like, is this another like manifestation of envy in a way, Emily? Like a subtle manifestation of envy of, I have this desire, like this pursuit of, well, I still want, I have this desire, but let's do what everyone else is doing still. Like, I'll be happy when I have what they have. I guess maybe a jealousy, really. Like, they don't want us to not have it. They also want to have it too. So that's jealousy, not envy. Anyway, that was my third point, was I just felt like, what a disservice to those two women too, to also be living in this lie, and to, not feel, I don't know, whatever. I don't know what their, I don't know what their past is. I don't know what their experience is, but I just feel like those three avenues, or those three main points, were kind of what I kept ruminating on, was the erosion of conscience, of not continuing to have this conversation about what is a good for individuals, for children, for our culture, our society. The child, right? The actual child that's being impacted by this relationship, that had no say in this situation at all. And then the third is the disservice to the individuals in those relationships, because of this lie that you have to do it like, heterosexual couples in order to be happy and fulfilled and be your true, quote unquote, your true self.
Right. I think there's this common idea that marriage is the end all be all for happiness. And if somebody is called to something besides that, like a vocation to the priesthood, religious life, single life, then that's not as good as it could have been, kind of thing. And I don't know where I get that from, if that's just how I was raised inadvertently. I was never told that or taught that by any means. But it just was as if that marriage sets the stage for the perfection, and then everything under that is like, that's still something you could be called to, but not as, if you want, it was as if that wouldn't make you as happy. And like I said, that's probably something personal, that I just grew up with that idea. And I can't specifically say why. Probably a lack of truth and knowledge in what the church teaches, honestly. And just the idea of discerning your vocation adequately and correctly and that sort of thing. And so I think, because I'll just speak for myself, because I have that idea, and I would venture to say other people have that thought, it's as if the idea is that somebody can't be as happy. And just like you've been saying, we don't know what each person is called to and what their gifts are. And God is a loving God, and he wants all of us to be with him in heaven. And he has different paths for all of us to get there that are fulfilling, and they don't necessarily have to be procreative. And you can still have a holy life. And to know what the church teaches, to know the truth about these vocations, I think it makes it less scary, actually, too. To think that, I could be called to single. I could be called to not marriage and whatever other, whether that was religious life or single life, and still be happy. That it just, to know that that's possible. And the courage for your friend to live out her vocation and to be honest about her feelings, that is everything, right? That gives so much hope to so many other people that might be struggling with that. And are there tons of people that know her story? Probably not. But the fact that she's willing to share that, and she felt comfortable to share that with you, and for you to then know that about her and speak about it, that's so huge. We need more stories like that. And unfortunately, a lot of times we get that in the saints, right? Like retrospectively, this is how they were and lived. And so I think it's really beautiful to know that, and for her to have the courage to speak about that.
Right. To have like the real-time story. Yeah. So I want us to wrap up here because we're almost at the hour mark, and we have to go get the kids up. But I guess I just want to encourage people, like, you don't have to be an expert to have a conversation like this. You can just be curious. Be curious and ask questions and examine our own conscience to see how either awake it is or how asleep it is, especially as Christians, because we shouldn't be ashamed to have a strong visceral reaction when we see something that is intrinsically evil being labeled as totally okay and normal. Like, no, we should not have that response. And for everyone to hear me clearly, that does not mean just because we have a visceral response or a strong rubbing of our conscience and an awareness of something that's not okay, that doesn't mean we respond to the situation in vitriol, in hatred, in anger. I didn't say anything to this couple, right? No comment was ever made. I've spoken to my children, and my children have not heard anything about this. There has been no gossiping about this couple. There's been nothing. This has all been in my head of like ruminating, right? Thinking, perseverating kind of on the situation of like, oh, what about it from this angle and this angle? And just to have that dialogue and that curiosity that, yeah, you don't have to be an expert, and you can just think about it. And it's okay if you don't. It's good if your conscience says this is wrong, That doesn't say anything about those people that are engaging in that act. It doesn't mean you're hateful and you're mean. It means you have a conscience, thanks be to God, that is still alive and working and well-formed. And then praying for the grace to respond if ever given the opportunity. And that was my prayer, was like, Lord, if ever given the opportunity, help me to speak in truth and in love. But I don't think that situation will present itself in this context, you know? But if it were, like, I want to behave as Christ would behave and give truth and love. So
we are all sinners, and we are called to hate the sin and love the sinner. Love the sinner, hate the sin, I think is the order.
Right.
And that doesn't,
And especially as adults, I think this is just, when we are lying to adults who are more rational creatures, more mature, can make decisions for themselves, I don't get as much of like a, rise in the like sense of injustice. But when it's children, everything in my body just starts to like quake, like, this is so wrong, like, and we're all just going along with it, smiling like, no, this is fine. And no, it's not fine. It's not fine. Something's wrong. So anyway, I got a ton of, I thought, really interesting articles and perspectives on things. So I will list that in the show notes. And I think that's all I got for this week. Do you have anything else, Emily?
I don't think so. The show notes are really helpful for understanding some of the research, which is really interesting.
Right. It's helpful. It's interesting. Again, you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be the social scientist. You don't even have to know all the statistics, right, to have a conversation. You can just ask questions and wonder and be curious. And I think that that's also a really great place to start. So, all right, guys. Well, we'll see you in our next episode. Bye, Emily.
Thanks, Amy. Bye.
That wraps up another episode of the NFP Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found our discussion enlightening and empowering. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please connect with us by sending us an email with your questions and stories to thenfpshow@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with more insights, tips, and heartfelt conversations about natural family planning. Until then, love responsibly.